This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, giving you another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Welcome aboard, glad to have you, appreciate some of the feedback I get. Not enough of it, by the way, but I'd love to get more. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. I'd love to hear your comments, thoughts, suggestions for new shows and interviews. If you're interested in having one, definitely reach out to me. And yes, of course, even criticisms, I'll even take those. Excuse me, a little frog in my throat. You can definitely reach out to me again at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Do take a few moments, if you would, and subscribe to our channel. Give us some feedback. Join us on Facebook as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Join the revolution, as my colleague talks about it. And you can certainly join the conversation with us up on Facebook. And so we'd love to have you on board. So, hey, today I wanted to talk a little about disease. And so, yes, it's that wonderful topic that everyone wants to ignore in our industry, right? That is, as I said to you in other podcasts, if you've been listening from the beginning, your work is dangerous. Make sure you protect yourself. So we have risks to our work that's different than the traditional pest control operator. Pest control operator has risks too, don't get me wrong, but the wildlife control operator has additional risks. One, they're exposed to a lot more different species of wildlife and a lot more zoonotics that can be transmitted from wildlife to humans, where pest control operator certainly has risks in terms of the chemical exposures. Wildlife control operators have a lowered risk in that regard because we don't have many pesticides available to us for use with vertebrate pests. So that's a difference. But in terms of zoonotics, the wildlife control operator certainly has more danger, hands down, than compared to the pest control operator. But don't forget, those of you who are pest control operators, you have some exposure as well. But today I wanted to talk about an interesting article that I came across during my work. As many of you know, I have a day job where I'm able to do a lot of reading, and I'm creating training materials. So this was a fascinating piece as I was doing some research on doing an article on Peromyscus, not an article, but a training on Peromyscus. That's your deer mouse and your white-footed mouse. So I came across this. This is by, I believe she's a doctor, but Dr. Sarah B. Weinstein out of California. And she did some work on raccoon roundworm and how it's being transmitted by roof rats. Now, just step back a little bit. Some of you may not be familiar with raccoon roundworm. So raccoon roundworm, the scientific name is Balasiscaris procyon. It's right here on the screen for you. Let me kind of blow that up for you so you can see that a little bit easier. Okay, there it is, Balasiscaris procyon. Okay, I'll even highlight it here for you, so make sure you have it. There it is, Balasiscaris procyon. It's a roundworm, or what they call it, nematode. I'm not an expert when it comes to parasites, but this is certainly one of the ascarid class of worms that can grow, and raccoons are the definitive host of this particular species. They are a necessary animal for it, and they have the ability to shed the eggs of this particular worm by the tens of thousands, and even the article said by the millions in their feces. And so this is because raccoons create these toilets, these areas where they defecate constantly. Obviously, that would be a major site of concentration of these raccoon roundworm eggs. You may say, well, what's the big deal, Stephen? There's just, wherever you find a lot of crap, you're going to find parasites or whatever. Sure, absolutely. The challenge is that other animals come and investigate those latrines as they're looking for some of the undigested seeds that are in the feces, and they're foraging in that, and now they're ingesting these raccoon roundworm eggs, and they become like an intermediate host or an alternative host. One of the scientific words that you'll see in this article is called paranetic, and so I'll discuss that shortly. But this is how you can have the worm being distributed even farther and more widely in the landscape than what we would have previously have thought. Now, her piece focuses on rodents and how much they're becoming part of the life cycle and distribution of this particular roundworm. So why am I telling you all this? It's important for wildlife control operators and those of you who are pest control operators as well to understand that raccoon roundworm can infect and affect other organisms than just raccoons. If you've heard me once, you've heard me probably say it 1,000 times. Treat animals as if they're dirty. You don't know where that animal has been, right? You don't want to be getting in touch with their fluids. You don't want to be getting bit by them. If you're handling them, you just want to be touching them with protective equipment like gloves. It drives me nuts when I see people grabbing animals with their bare hands. I understand there may be situations where there's no other way because you need the dexterity. I get it. I'm just telling you, be careful out there in that you're going to have to be thinking about washing your hands, because if you forget and you're biting your fingernails, you can be ingesting a whole lot of nasty stuff. Now, there's other things involved in raccoon feces other than just simply raccoon roundworm. But raccoon roundworm has a characteristic. It makes it last a very long time after it's shed from the raccoon's body. When those eggs are profoundly persistent in the environment, they can last a very long time, like decades in the soil, provided it's moist enough. Okay, so the persistence of this particular egg is amazing, all right, because of that encapsulation that it has. The article noted here that you have 150 different species of animals have been identified as being carriers of this particular roundworm. Now, that doesn't mean they're good carriers. They may be a dead-end host. The worm may not be able to replicate in them. There may be a whole host of problems, but the point is they found 150 different species carrying this particular worm. So don't just think that raccoons are the only one that can carry it. It's not true. This parasite can infect dogs. Now, interestingly, they haven't found any evidence of it infecting cats. Now, cats have other parasites, but it appears that they seem to have some sort of resistance against this one, so they don't have it. My suspicion is that cats tend to want to eat some fresh meat. That may be part of the issue, but also maybe their stomach acids and what have you make it an unhospitable place for the worm to migrate into the body. So let's talk a little bit more about how this works through raccoons. And so juvenile raccoons are the most susceptible to being infected with this particular worm. Doesn't mean adults can't, but adults tend to have some resistance, and so the worm tends to just simply reside in their intestinal tract, feeding on whatever the raccoon is feeding on, and then, of course, creating those eggs, and then the eggs are shed out through the raccoon feces. But juvenile raccoons can be much more susceptible. The worm can stay inside the gut, or the worm can penetrate the intestinal walls and then migrate. Sometimes the worm may migrate into muscle tissue, or it can migrate up into the liver and lungs. I think it can go into lungs, and also most seriously the brain, although the liver is pretty bad as well. And so some animals can be seriously affected by this particular worm, depending where it moves. Now, for us as humans, this all isn't in this article, by the way. Some of this is a compilation of other research. So for humans, generally speaking, the bigger you are, the more likely the worm, if you happen to ingest some of these eggs and get it, it may just pass through your intestine and then go into your muscle tissue and then what's called form a cyst and just stay there. And you may not even know you're infected. I could be infected for all I know. Okay. The danger part is if the worm migrates and goes someplace else like the liver or the brain. Children have been most susceptible to this particular roundworm. Obviously, there's less body mass there, and there have been children who have played in the dirt. That dirt was contaminated with raccoon feces. I believe in one situation in California, the children were playing near the house, and there was a raccoon toilet on the roof. Rainfall, obviously, would have moved that feces down into the gutters, down the downspouts, and it would have sprayed out onto the soil. Children were playing in the dirt, and then, of course, what do kids do is they stick their hands in their mouth. And the kids became infected and became, I think some died, and one became like a vegetable, basically, just underwent severe neurological damage to the brain. So this can be devastating. So you as a wildlife control professional, you as a pest control professional need to be looking at raccoons on roofs where they're defecating, where their toilets are on the roof. You need to be then informing your client that this is a problem. And this is why making sure that the raccoons aren't defecating up there anymore needs to be handled. Same way if there's a toilet in the lawn, out in the property somewhere, those toilets need to be addressed as well. Now, you can Google my name, Stephen Vantassel, and I have a publication that talks about raccoon toilet latrine cleanup. It's basically a proposal to the industry to help standardize some things. It was based on the research that I was able to come across up to the time of publication, trying to create sort of a standard for the industry, as well as to start a conversation that perhaps the document should be improved. I'm more than welcome to hearing criticisms about it, especially those of you who have a lot of experience doing raccoon cleanups. We want to make this a document because right now we've got nothing. Okay, my document is the only one that I'm aware of that even tries to systematically talk about the protocol of doing raccoon latrine cleanups. Okay. Now that I've probably scared some of you about this particular roundworm, let's kind of dial things back a little bit and talk about what the raccoon roundworm isn't. How do you contract it? Well, you're contracting it by ingestion. I have some concern over whether it can be inhaled and then the eggs would attach maybe to the sides of your mouth and then you would swallow it. So, but primarily you're eating this particular worm, right? Now, will a respirator clear it out? Absolutely. The eggs are rather large. Any NIOSH filter, I believe 95 or above, should be easily able to exclude that egg out because it's rather large. That's my understanding of it. So when you're doing a cleanup inside of an attic, enclosed space, even if you're not in an enclosed place, you need to wet that feces down so that you're not getting all this aerosolization. Okay. One of the things you can do, you say, well, is there something that will kill it? Yes, fire. If you can get the temperature up high enough, I believe it's 144 degrees Fahrenheit for at least a minute. You say, that's not very hot. You're right. But the problem is that the raccoon feces is an insulator. So even if you're blowtorching it, which is over 400 degrees, do you have enough heat to penetrate all of the feces to get to the eggs inside of it? That's a problem. Plus, the research shows that there's more active active eggs along the perimeter of a toilet than it is in the middle of the toilet. So you have to think about erosion. Where is that toilet flowing to? So if you're scooping this all up, you got to be thinking larger than the footprint of the toilet. But that's enough. That's probably for a presentation for another time. So let's get to Dr. Weinstein's article here. And so her research basically did is she found raccoon toilets. Then she trapped a bunch of deer mice, that's Paramyscus maniculatus, and roof rats, looked at them for the presence of raccoon roundworm by dissecting them, cutting them open. Then they would freeze them and then put them out into the landscape with trail cameras to see what animals picked up those carcasses. And what's interesting, what they found was that roof rats were rife with these particular worms. In fact, on a gram to gram level, roof rats had like 7 times the amount of raccoon roundworm in them compared to a deer mouse. Now that's amazing. And what they found is that these roof rats were foraging in raccoon toilets and ingesting large quantities of these raccoon eggs, and were getting these parasites inside of their body. And they found that other animals were coming along, like raccoons, and eating those larger animals. And what they found was that raccoons really weren't paying a lot of attention to deer mice, partly because probably they're too small for them to find or waste time on. And other animals would spend more time getting the roof rat, and other animals were spending time getting the dead deer mice, like possums, for instance. Possums can certainly do it. She then noticed that there was a relationship between the roof rats where they were trapped in the proximity that they were trapped to a raccoon latrine. Makes sense. Roof rats that were caught in closer proximity to a raccoon latrine were more likely to have raccoon roundworm and have it at higher densities than roof rats caught farther away from raccoon latrines. Makes perfect sense. So again, why am I telling you all this? You need to be, as professionals, thinking about the biological systems that you're involved in. So when you're doing things like when you're doing raccoon control, do you have roof rats in the area? So ask yourself the question, if roof rats are doing this, is it possible that Norway rats are doing this? Or perhaps wood rats are doing this? There's research on the East Coast that points out that there are certain pack rats that are already threatened, or their numbers are getting way down. I think it's in the Virginia area. And they're finding that the raccoon roundworm is also accelerating their decline. Why? Because they forage in raccoon crap looking for seeds and stuff, right? So we have to be thinking about other animals that might be in our landscape and how that's being affected, because things are connected. So would Norway rats be susceptible to this as well? I don't know. But I think it's a fair question to be thinking, if a roof rat does this, why wouldn't a Norway rat do it? Norway rats eat seeds. Norway rats can do some disgusting things. So, but maybe they don't. I don't know. But I think it's important to consider the possibility and why we need to sometimes err in caution. So I'm not wanting you to make this a fear tactic for your clients. Don't out there exploit fear. We do need to inform our clients that with raccoon roundworm, if they have raccoons in their structure, this is a concern. I'm a big fan of handing out sheets of fact sheets, data sheets on particular things to help inform your client about different risks, whether it be rabies, whether it be white nose syndrome, even though that's not a threat to humans, that's a threat to bats, of course. We need to be thinking about raccoon roundworm. We need to be thinking perhaps of toxoplasmosis if you're dealing with free-ranging cats outdoors and even cats indoors. You need to be thinking about other types of diseases related to wildlife. For those of us in the West, that may be something like plague. If you're dealing with ground squirrels and prairie dogs, plague can be an issue. Right, so we found that also with ground squirrels and even with deer mice, tularemia can be an issue. Right, so you need to have your stack of fact sheets, and you don't have to have many of them because we want to talk about the most dangerous, the most significant diseases. But you should at least be informing your client and then putting that on your contract and saying, I handed the client. Just have a checkbox, handed the client the rabies sheet, or I handed her the tularemia sheet, or the hantavirus sheet, or the plague sheet. You should have several of these handy, and it should be something from a reputable source like the Centers for Disease Control, maybe your state health department. That's not your company, that's not you talking, it's somebody else talking, and that you're giving the client some background. Again, we're not looking to scare people and we're going to use fear to get them motivated. We want to try to get that proper balance of, hey, you have a raccoon toilet in your attic. Do people go in the attic? Well, no. Well, then do you want it? We can remove it, but understand, even removing it doesn't mean all the eggs are gone, but you're just going to clean it. You're not sterilizing it. That's a big difference, right? There are no antiseptics that are registered to kill raccoon roundworm eggs. Okay, you can say, well, what about DSLR? I think is the one I'm thinking of. Or there's some of the hospital grade stuff. Yeah, great material. DSV. Sorry, that's what it is. DSV. Great stuff. Raccoon roundworm, laugh at it. Oh, it'll kill a lot of other things, but it won't do a thing about raccoon roundworm. Okay, so it just doesn't work. You can say, well, what about bleach? Bleach kills a lot of stuff. Won't do anything with raccoon roundworm. Okay, what kills raccoon roundworm is heat and dryness. So, is it possible that if an attic is dry and there's no fresh feces and you get hot summers, that over time that raccoon roundworm would dry out and desiccate and die? Yes, that's very possible. The problem is we just don't know how long it takes because that research hasn't been done. But certainly, do I think, and this is my opinion, and I think there's evidence to support it, do I think it's safer for you as a professional, if a client wants a clean out done, let's say you worked in the spring, you removed the raccoons, you sealed up the house, and the raccoon toilet that they want removed in the attic, when I mean toilet, I'm talking about something where there's some volume here, not just one or two droppings, right? I hope you're not going to be ripping anybody off with one or two droppings, okay? That's ridiculous. I mean, you should just grab it with your gloved hand and put it in a plastic bag and get rid of it, right? So we're talking about toilets, right? Usually this can be a couple yards across, depending how long the raccoon's been there, right? Toilets. That would be a situation where if you can then remove those raccoons and then let the summer heat bake that in the attic, that is certainly going to be safer. Not calling it safe, I'm calling it safer to let that all dry out. You probably will have some eggs getting killed simply by drying out. Now, does the attic temperature ever get above 144 degrees? The research I've seen, it doesn't get above 144 degrees, at least what I saw. Perhaps those of you in the southern tier of the country, you might be able to disagree with that. I'd love to hear from you. But remember, we're not talking about the temperature at the roof level because raccoons don't defecate on the ceiling. They defecate on the floor of the attic. So you have to have that temperature gauge down there to see if it reaches that level of heat, temperature, I should say. So the bottom line here is that, yeah, I think it would be safer. Plus, you want to probably do the work when it's cooler in the fall anyway, simply because there's a risk of heat stroke up there when you're doing your work. So take that as you will. There's additional information at the CDC site. I would strongly encourage you to visit that, do a little more reading on this. But what was interesting in terms of what Dr. Winstein found was, here's what she found. Paramiscus maniculatus, that's the deer mouse, right? Paramiscus maniculatus, 45% of the animals she trapped were infected with 3.5 worms each on average. Roof rats, on the other hand, 75% of the roof rats were infected, and the average that they had was 1,000 worms. Now that's amazing. So that's why, remember when I said earlier that on a gram to gram basis, in other words, 1 gram of Paramiscus, 1 gram of roof rats had like 7 times the amount of roundworm in them than a deer mouse did. Okay, which is simply amazing. Another interesting fact was that the deer mice, the worms tended to go to the brain and the muscle tissue. In the roof rats, the worms infected the muscle tissue and the intestines and liver area, but interestingly, rarely infected the brain. In fact, of all the rats she trapped, and she trapped a fair number of them, only 1 rat had a worm in the brain. So for some reason, the raccoon roundworm liked to stay in the viscera part of the animal and the muscle tissue rather than going to the brain, whereas in the deer mouse, it went into the viscera and the brain. Fascinating information. What she also noticed was, again, she had those trail cameras on the carcasses that she put out into the landscape to see what picked them up, and she found that raccoons rarely picked up deer mice, but they did take up rats. And, of course, as I've already mentioned, roof rats forage in raccoon toilets. So those of you in roof rat areas need to be thinking about the knowledge that roof rats can carry raccoon roundworm. So if someone's dog is eating a roof rat, that dog could then become infected with raccoon roundworm. So these are things that are going to be spinning around our head. This is why it's important for us not to have free-ranging dogs, not to have free-ranging cats, right? No, cats are somewhat immune, it appears, to raccoon roundworm, but they're exposed to other things. So I hope you found this article rather interesting and fascinating. If you're wanting to look it up yourself, let me pull this out and I'll read it for you here. Her name is Sarah, S-A-R-A, no H on the end of it, Sarah, S-A-R-A, B. Weinstein, that's W-E-I-N-S-T-E-I-N, and her article is Introduced Rats and the Endemic Roundworm. Does Rattus rattus, that's the roof rat, contribute to Balis ascaris procyonis transmission in California? And she published this in 2017 in the Journal of Parasitology, volume 103, issue 6, pages 677 through 682. That's the Journal of Parasitology, 2017, volume 103, issue 6, pages 677 through 682. Again, a fascinating article showing how raccoon latrines can be distributing more raccoon roundworm to a wider area. How? Through the animals that forage through the feces looking for items within the droppings. And we know that roof rats do this. There's other research that points out that pack rats can do this as well. Keep that in mind. Be safe out there. We got a little geeky today, but I do want to start getting into some more what I call article reviews, because I think there's some interesting things that aren't going to be normally talked about in your pest control training issues, and that this can give you folks who are sort of armchair naturalists or out in the field working, understanding the connectedness that we have with nature in this point, and that we need to be cognizant that things are a lot more complicated than what we realize, and sometimes more dangerous than what we realize. All right, well, I hope you found that helpful. My name is Stephen Vantassel. This podcast is Living the Wildlife. Do take a few moments, subscribe to our channel, join us on Facebook and the Pest Geek podcast channel on YouTube, as well as join us on Facebook in terms of our Facebook page. Join us along. We'd love to have you join the conversation. If you have comments, which should have criticisms, do reach out to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. And I would love to chat with you more about some ideas that you may have. Or if you're looking to be on the show, definitely pitch a topic to me. We'd love to entertain that particular issue. We want to make this show useful for those of you out in the field, but I'm not tied to the issue of always making you money. If that's what you're looking to do, Stephen, how are you going to help make me money? Then this podcast is probably not for you. I want to help you make money, but every podcast is not going to be about that. We're going to talk about how to make you safer, more educated, and a better wildlife control operator. And I think that over time, that will make you more money. But each show is not necessarily going to put $1 in your pocket each time. But if I can save you and help you understand the dynamics of different types of diseases and protect you and protect your client, I consider that to be a win. So again, this is the Living the Wildlife podcast. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Thanks for listening. Take care, everybody.